we're talking about nurturing patients, right? Keeping them aware of their own health, and then how the practice can help them in that, in managing that. And I think, many practice managers today they back burner that type of communication, right? Practice managers in every practice I've ever worked with, they're concerned about throughput, they're concerned about, closing care gaps, they're concerned about, making sure that, their staff can handle the volume and don't burn out. They're focused at the day-to-day level. So patient communication, in terms of nurturing communications, just takes a back seat. And so when it takes a back seat, you really, the patient isn't served as well, because they could be hearing from the practice about how to manage that condition, over the course of the year versus just at that one visit. Let automated communication programs tell that story to the patient over the course of the year, versus, trying to get that patient in, by the end of the year to get their well visit done. And then it's sort of all hands on deck, to try to get to try to meet the number that, either their payers are requiring or their practice associations are requiring. Let the communication do the work throughout the year, so that you don't have that massive sort of end of the year push.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Scaling Practice Management, where we help practice managers grow their medical practices smarter, not harder. Brought to you by Talkie AI, the company behind AI medical receptionist voice agents. My name is Jakub Grajcar. I'm the head of marketing at Talkie AI, and my guest today is Jonathan Cummins, patient communication expert, CEO at GuideUp Health, CRO, and partner at Incept Digital Marketing. John, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well, thank you.
Yes, super nice to have you on the show here today. Really excited to record and to talk about patient communication. We've got a bunch of different angles planned on how to approach this topic, so it's bound to be interesting. But first, the tradition on the show is I like to help our watchers and listeners get to know the guests also from a personal side a little bit. So I wanted to ask you, John, could you tell us about something fun that you did this year? What is the most fun thing you've done this year thus far? Let's start there.
So, I did something a little bit out of the ordinary for me. My wife and I met a couple of friends of ours at a mountain resort, like a lodge in a mountain. We didn't actually stay there, but we hiked the mountain where that lodge is located, and they call it a rock scramble, and I've never done one. And so you're up and down and underneath all these big, huge boulders and rocks and all of the, all throughout the path up the mountain. And we got to about the top quarter of the mountain. We had about maybe a quarter of the hike left. And the hike from that point on went up through literally through the top of the mountain, between the granite slabs that make up the mountain. And the hike up wasn't on a ground anymore, on a trail. It was climbing up these ladders, and it had to be 300 or 350 feet up, just straight up, and these ladders that were about wide enough for 1 foot, one of your feet to climb. We didn't have gear to do it, and boy, I'll tell you, that was an experience that I'll never forget, but I probably wouldn't want to do again. Again, without the right gear. They call it the lemon squeeze at the top of that mountain, because you're squeezing literally right through the two sides of the mountain at the top, and you can literally put your hands on both sides of both the front and the back half of the mountain, and lift yourself up out through it. And it was harrowing, if I could sum it up in one word. So that was one of the most exciting things we've done.
Exciting, yeah. This reminds me of a friend of mine who's an agency CEO. His name is Gray. He once said there are two types of fun: type 1 fun and type 2 fun. type 1 is fun in the moment and type 2 is fun after the fact. So you definitely went for type 2 there, it seems
It's
like.
definitely type 2. That's exactly right.
Okay. Okay, awesome, awesome. That's great to know, and thank you for sharing that story. This is what I love is, we had a couple conversations previously. This is not our first conversation, but I never knew that story, and we just started recording here today, and already I feel like I went on that hike alongside with you, so that's great. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk about healthcare then, shall we? And again, continuing with the show's tradition, I wanted to ask you the question that everybody gets, and one day we'll do a compilation of all the answers. Uh, Watchers and listeners, if you know the show, you know what's coming. If this is your first time, you'll be discovering this alongside John. But anyway, John, what is your number one tip for successfully growing a healthcare practice? What would you add to the compilation?
Yeah, it's a really good question, as it always is. And the answer that would give, of course, is unique to me. But my number one tip for any practice of any size, especially if it's an independent practice and not tied to a system, would be just be open to trying new things and be willing to invest in your practice. There's a lot of things that come at practice managers every day and owners, every day, but it's so important for any business, not just clinical practices, to be open to new ways of doing things and new methods to reach patients, from a messaging standpoint, from a relationship and and obviously quality of care perspective. But yeah, just be willing to be open to new things and willing to invest in the practice.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly agree with that. I would say if I were to ask healthcare practices to be open to one new thing, it would be AI, and specifically AI medical front desk voice agents. But I might be just a tad biased because that's what we do at Talkie. We found that when practices open up to it, they can find great results. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think is an innovation then, something that practices should be open to, something that you've seen, maybe experimented with some of the practices you're in touch with? What have you seen that you think would be good for them to experiment with?
I think one of the things that deserves more investigation from practices is what they can do to engage their patients, once they've walked out the door, and to some degree once before they even walk in the door, right? And I think there are some platforms available today, including AI, including things that are software that's developed with AI to help with that, that communication, that ability to keep their patient engaged in their own health, right? And then with the added benefit of keeping the brand of the practice in front of the patient, so that there's never this disconnect, right, from the patient provider perspective or patient physician perspective, and that patient has has in the forefront of their mind their health every day, right? That's the primary goal, particularly primary care, right? Let's not just have the patient think about their health when they schedule their next wellness visit, and then show up a year later.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's definitely something I want to dig into more as this episode continues. So let's call it that when it comes to the number one tip. Thank you so much. And it goes, I always imagine at one point I'm going to have like an animation, there's going to be like a vault, if you will. And this nugget of knowledge will go in the vault, and yeah, I just need to get my editor to finally do that. But anyway, with that out of the way, so before we dive deeper into patient communication, some of the things you mentioned, I think it would be good for you to provide a little bit of background. I mentioned GuideUp Health, I mentioned Incept, but could you give a little bit of where you're coming from in terms of what you've done, what your background is, so that the watchers and listeners can better understand?
Absolutely. So my background in healthcare begins back in the early 2000s. I think just like a lot of people do, right? unless you're in a pre-med track and you kind of work your way through the system, into whatever clinical role you're going to be in. My background in healthcare was on the business side. It started by chance. I worked for an organization in upstate New York that was a health plan, and it just so happened that they had an opening in the Medicare space. So I worked for a payer, a health plan in upstate New York, as a product manager at the time. That was my career path from, as I said, some around 2002 up until today. In a sense, I worked for health plans in various roles, including directors in product development, directors in marketing, director in marketing, national director of marketing for an organization that had a nationwide presence. So I was sort of in that space, in the Medicare space, in those roles for since about 2018. A few years earlier, in 2015, I seed funded an agency, an advertising agency, which we really have become much more than that. We're more of a strategic marketing firm that provides strategic consulting, particularly in healthcare, and then assets behind that, right? To get to put programs in place for our clients. And at the same time, that company is called Incept. At the same time, I brought up an organization called GuideUp Health, which is very specifically focused in the healthcare technology space, uh, particularly in patient and member engagement. And so we do a lot of we work with a lot of payers and health plans and clinical delivery systems to help them uh, push out patient engagement programs that benefit the patient, keep them engaged, keep the brand of the organization in front of them, and then benefits the provider or the health plan by increasing the shared savings and value-based care revenue that they can get from the different sources.
Okay, gotcha. And so wait, that covers Incept. Where does GuideUp Health fit into this?
Yep. So GuideUp Health is kind of that second part where we design software very specifically to engage patients. The parts of those would include things like health risk assessments. It includes rewards and incentive plans that are tied to the data that comes off those assessments. And then finally, so that back end patient engagement messaging that is also tied to some of the responses that we get in assessments and some of the other data that we collect. So it's very personalized communication that benefits the patient because it keeps them, it keeps the will to want to manage their own health kind of going throughout the year.
Yeah. So of course, we'll leave links to GuideUp and Incept in the show notes for anybody who wants to learn more. I'm kind of reminded of what you said as the answer to the number one tip question, and I felt like we might want to dig in a little bit deeper here for just a second. So, you mentioned practices being more open to try new things and kind of invest in innovation. So, could you give us a little bit of a taste of on the marketing side, what are some things that the practices could try? I'll be honest with you, I remember some of our previous conversations and some of the kind of tactics you mentioned there, and it would be cool for you to share about this on the show as well because I found it interesting. So, any kind of teaser you can share here.
So in terms of innovation, there are there are there's software available today on the market that can help practices engage their patients in ways that they aren't that's not happening right now. And again, it kind of does all those things I mentioned earlier. Helps with risk-based revenue, helps with patient satisfaction ratings, helps close care gaps, and a lot of these, the software I'm referring to, really is focused on serving engaging communications in an automated way. So whether that's a health risk assessment, whether that's a very specific condition specific assessment to a patient, for example, that might have diabetes, you know, uh, once we have some data to work with, we can then tie, these customized communications for their patients to keep them um, aware of, their condition and aware of how to better manage that condition, without the need for the practice to be constantly, overseeing that patient, right? Um, and so, that's an example of a fully automated way to keep, the practice presence in front of the patient. There's a lot of there's many different kind of, there's different views of how to apply some of the software. That's a patient view. If you're looking as a practice to acquire new patients, now you're going down a different road in terms of the types of automation and technology that's available to engage that individual, to want to pick up the phone and learn, call your practice and learn more about your practice. There are sort of traditional digital tactics like email and sort of paid search type tactics so that you're available when people are intending to find you or intending to look for a new provider. And then there are, more innovative tactics that flow through things like geofencing. So if a practice was in a pure growth mode, right? They're just looking to acquire patients or bring new patients in. Let's say for primary care, there's certain things you can do to serve your message or to serve your brand, to that household, right? You could actually geofence down to a household level from a standpoint to put your brand in front of that individual to help them become aware of you, help them pick up the phone or encourage them to pick up the phone and give you a call. We can actually serve advertising in a way down to, using streaming TV and streaming audio that is very specific to a list of patients you might want to engage, right? So, or prospective patients, right? New patients you're trying to acquire, based on their certain demographics, right? And we can only serve those ads to those people so that you're not, as a practice, you're not wasting money and it's an efficient way to use your budget.
So, for example, tell me if I'm understanding this correctly. Let's say my practice wants to, like, primarily serves elderly patients, let's say, and there's a neighborhood nearby that kind of skews older and the demographic. I could target that neighborhood with some sort of advertisement and try to get them to visit my clinic for like a checkup or something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can engage that patient. You don't even, I mean, it doesn't even have to be in a zip code. It could be, a retirement community that we kind of draw a fence around, right? And then serve that kind of communication to those individuals. Now, or even down to, a specific condo or residential residence level, right? Now there's certainly compliance that we have to be aware of, and requirements by state really that we have to be aware of, when we do develop those types of programs. And obviously HIPAA, and obviously, certain programs around PHI we have to comply with. But yeah, absolutely, those programs exist. They're not, I guess, relatively speaking, not terribly expensive. Uh, and I would say, geared really well towards independent practices, right? Healthcare systems typically will have large marketing presences, right? Where their market departments will do a lot of this, but when you're with an independent practice, you may not have that resource. So, some of what we do, and some of what's out there can really benefit these independent practices.
I understand. Okay, that's really interesting. And I hope that at least some of the practice managers listening to this are having this light bulb moment right now where they're thinking, okay, I didn't know that was possible, and that we might be able to explore something like that. And hey, John is a great person to contact about that. I'll say that right now. Had some conversations earlier that were really inspiring for our marketing as well. Uh, okay, so I wanted to take a step back at this point and talk about patient communication more generally, and to see what kind of threads we can pull on here. So the next question I have for you, John, is, when it comes to practice managers today, imagine you have an audience of like 100, 150. I don't know, let's make it 250. It's an imaginary audience. It can be as large as we want. Practice managers, right? What do you think, based on your experience, what do you think these practice managers are struggling with the most when it comes to patient communication? Because that's what we wanted to focus on here today. Which areas of patient communication are probably the most difficult for them right now?
I think, we're talking about nurturing patients, right? Keeping them aware of their own health, and then how the practice can help them in that, in managing that. And I think, many practice managers today kind of they back burner that type of communication, right? Practice managers in every practice I've ever worked with, I'm just going to sort of, say it very bluntly. Practice managers are, as they should be, concerned about getting, they're concerned about throughput. They're concerned about, closing care gaps. They're concerned about, making sure that, their staff can handle the volume and don't burn out. They're they're focused at the day-to-day level, right? And keeping the operation going, which is absolutely where their heads should be. But I think because of that, because of how busy practice managers typically are, and it doesn't matter the size of the practice, right? The small single doc, mom and pop shop, all the way up to, large, multi-specialty practices, with many extenders and so on. They're they're very busy, and so patient communication, in terms of nurturing communications, just takes a back seat. And the issue with that is that a lot of the work that they do around closing care gaps, for example, or making sure that their clinical staff is addressing care gaps, right? The work that they do around that, it could be done almost year long. And so when it takes a back seat, you really, the patient isn't served as well, because they could be hearing from the practice about how to manage that condition, over the course of the year versus just at that one visit. There's also communication that's designed to it's designed to spur that patient into action, right? They're action-oriented communications that can push that patient in for the well visit, which we know, right? On by all counts, is one of the most important things that, certainly in primary care, we can do, is try to get our patients in to have their well visit, done at least annually. So, let communication, automated communication programs, tell that story to the patient across over the course of the year, versus, trying to get that patient in, by the end of the year to get their well visit done. And then it's sort of all hands on deck, to try to get to try to meet the number that, either their payers are requiring, practice associations are requiring. Let the communication do the work throughout the year so that you don't have that massive sort of end of the year push. So I think from an innovation standpoint, which is where this question sort of started, is find those programs and that automation that can tell that story to the patient throughout the year, versus, pushing at the end of the year and putting that pressure on staff, and, and then going through the nervousness and pain of trying to get it all done using human resources.
So the way I'm understanding this is the end result you would like here, in terms of nurturing patients, is you don't want them all coming in at once, for their annual checkup, but rather, some of them are coming through the door, or maybe they're calling to schedule an appointment, saying, I know it's not time for my annual yet, but I got this email from you that I might want to come in for this particular, I don't know, assessment or an additional, some kind of additional checkup, and here I am showing up earlier, taking care of my health more proactively. That all sounds great. I do wonder, could you paint a more detailed picture of what that would look like? Because I went to email, right? Because that's, something that I know from a marketer perspective. We could be sending them emails, but what would a campaign like that look like, and how could it be automated? What are some options here, to inspire our audience of 255 practice managers? 5 more just walked in, they're curious to hear what you're gonna say.
I love it. Let's keep those numbers coming.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so what it could look like is bringing on a technology, or an app that can allow the practice manager to develop specific programs, right, that will engage the patient in multiple ways and done at their fingertips, at their desktop, without the need to engage other, outside resources. So, as an example, there's automation in the market that allows the practice manager to develop a health risk assessment or an assessment specifically for their patients that have diabetes or COPD, or, you name the chronic condition. That patient receives the assessment, they complete it, they send it back, they hit submit, and it goes back to the practice. So the practice now has information to be able to say, well, this patient probably needs, to come in and see us, or we can wait till their next annual well visit. So once they receive or have that communication, that that assessment that individual completed, is tied to an ongoing content program, right? So that, um, now that patient's going to start receiving some communication, whether that's email or text or whatever form that patient wants to be communicated to. They'll receive those sort of ongoing communications, whether that's once a month, twice a month, whatever it is, that helps them with hints on how to manage their condition, helps them understand where to go and who to call if there's an issue. Uh, it's an ongoing, automated program that the practice manager really doesn't have to do anything to manage. It's in place because it's just automatically kind of in place and being pushed out to the patient.
It makes sense, yes. It reminds me of just, the practice of audience segmentation in marketing, because what you're basically doing here is, based on this assessment, you're creating a few segments and then you nurture each segment differently. Funnily enough, we just published something like that on our site as well. So we wrote a 2-minute quiz or self-assessment test. I'm working on the branding really, because quizzes sounds a little bit too whimsical. But anyway, it's a list of 10 questions, and practice managers can use that to self-assess really what the benefit of implementing AI voice agents on the front desk might be for them. So I suppose it's a similar kind of tactic, but also applied on a different scale and for a different kind of problem. So that's really interesting, and I think that gives a nice chunk of inspiration to our practice managers here in terms of what can be done. Mm, do you have any advice on the content of such a campaign to dig a little bit deeper still? So what I mean is, in terms of what to say based on the assessment, what do you say to those where the assessment indicates that there isn't a burning need, perhaps, but you still want to keep in touch with them? Or in terms of the cadence of such communication, how frequently would you send that out? If you could give just a little bit of a taste of what that might look
Sure.
like.
Yeah. Let's start with the end first, in terms of cadence. So the fact of the matter is, you don't want to over communicate to a patient, because then you'll have the opposite effect, right? They'll become desensitized. They won't engage. They won't continue down that journey that you want them to, which is, to continuously, have the brand of the practice in the back of their minds. And then, being able to, essentially having those communications serving to, help them manage that condition they have. So, number one, cadence, probably no more than, 3 to 4 communications in a month, I would say. That's once a week, if you will. And so if somebody has multiple conditions, right, you want whatever automation you have or software you have to recognize that somebody may have received, communication once already that week, and not to send that communication about whatever the second condition or third they may have. So you want a platform that's going to recognize, and be set to a specific number of communications, right? So that you're not desensitizing your patients. You also really have to, as a practice, have to find a platform that's going to engage the patient in the way they want to be engaged, right? Meet them where they are in terms of the communication. So if they would rather have a text message sent to them, then, a text message is sent, right? If they would rather have an email, then emails are sent. In some cases, if they would rather have print communications, then a print communication is sent. You want a program or a platform that's going to be able to accommodate that kind of, communication preference from a patient standpoint. Some EMRs will do that. right? Some EMRs are set up for communication preference, but they're not set up for the type of communications we're talking about. They're set up to deliver, uh, direct patient physician or patient nurse communications, NP or PA communications, not sort of brand specific condition management type communications. So I don't know, from an EMR standpoint, there's so many EMRs, right? That some will provide some of that preference type communication management we're talking about. Some will not. Um, but so I think cadence is at least, no more than 4 communications a month, 1 a week, if you will. And that even depends on, depending on their preference. If it's text-based, you might only want to send them a couple, maybe 3 a month.
Yeah, that's a more sensitive channel, definitely. And so the next one, or the previous one actually, part of the question was about the content of such communication. Anything here in terms of, do we send them, a longer article, something that they can use for self-education, or something interactive like this assessment you mentioned? Is it a mix? Are there other options? I'm curious what you would say
Sure,
here.
yeah, I think it's a mix, right? I think you wanna be able to send different, even if they're not from a content standpoint, the actual content is not terribly different, but the format is different. So, for example, you would want to mix maybe typical emails with a newsletter. Maybe you send a newsletter once a month. Then it could be an e-newsletter that comes, through the same platform, um, but it's a different format, right? And obviously, secure email, it's not dead. Lots of people say, "Oh, well, email's dead. It's overused. It's nobody looks at it anymore." That's Nothing could be farther from the truth. Email is a communication platform that's going to live on, well beyond me. EMR, I mean, you can use your EMR, right, for specific communications, but typically, again, I would separate the types of patient engagement communications we're talking about from what comes out of the EMR, because the EMR should be reserved for that very clinical, sort of specific therapeutic type focused communications. So yeah, I would say newsletters, sort of general format emails, pamphlet type style emails, type communication, links in text that bring you to landing pages that are designed for specific purposes, perhaps based on what the data is that's coming out of your health risk assessments. Lots of different kind of ways to reach that patient.
Yeah. And I think I would be remiss not to mention that, from my standpoint or the standpoint of Talkie, we do see the possibility of involving phones as well as one of the channels here, because I imagine, again, as you said, different patients are going to have different preferences, right? But you can imagine just as easily, somebody getting an email leading to a self-assessment that they fill out and that triggering some sort of further communication. I can imagine a future, and we're actually building that future, as some of that is available today, where you have, an automated phone call go out, and these get a bad rap these days, but they do sound and work a lot better than people would expect, that people are used to. And the assessment happens on the call. Do you have 3 minutes to answer questions about your health so that we can better inform you on when your next checkup should be? Now, I'm biased, but I would say if I got a call like that every once in a while, I wouldn't mind it. Because it would be just a few minutes of my time. I could respond saying, "Could you call me in the evening?" And the agent responds to that. But then I could invest a few minutes of my time. It is a little bit more. How should I say this? It's kind of pushed on me, right? But with health-related matters, sometimes you need a little bit of a push. I'm not sure if you would agree, to actually take some steps that you've been putting up. Because would you say, leading question, but I'm gonna go with it anyway. Would you say this is also a little bit about like pushing through the inertia that some patients might have, just putting it off for later all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the reality. No one wants to go get a blood test. Nobody wants to, go get their flu shot. You just wouldn't, you just don't want to do it, right? So I'd say more often than not, almost 100% of the time, you're asking that's what healthcare is about. You're asking people to do things, that they that are not fun, right? They're not areas of your life you want to you find appealing. So I think almost every time, you have to have the value, you have to show the value in that content of why it's important, of how little time it might take, of how inexpensive it can be, you have to give people reasons to do something they don't typically want to do. So yes, I agree with you 100%.
So reducing friction is definitely one thing. And again, as a marketer, I can definitely feel that too. We call it objection handling, right? There might be objections as in it's gonna take a long time. No, it isn't. It's gonna be very expensive. No, it won't be unnecessarily. So I understand all of that. A question that popped in my mind, just out of nowhere here is, what do you think about the tone of these messages? So is it more, like in the vein of get it over with, just feel the, emotionally speaking, feel the relief of not having to think about it for a while? Or would you rather go, and I'm sure there's more than just two ways, right? Would you rather go in the vein of kind of putting the fear in them and trying to make them aware that there might be serious consequences for ignoring this? What have you seen work in terms of like the emotional tone of these messages?
Yeah, that's a complex. The answers are kind of complex to that question, because fear sometimes doesn't work, right? And neither does the carrot. So this neither the stick nor the carrot works. So then what, right? Um, I'm going to give you an example. My father-in-law's diabetic, and he knows he shouldn't be eating donuts. He knows he shouldn't be eating cake and very high sugar kind of items that have lots and lots of bad stuff in them. Um, he doesn't really get a lot of exercise, but he does stuff he knows he shouldn't do, right? With specifically having, that condition. So what is it that it's gonna take to get somebody, to stop doing that stuff, right? And I think to some degree it is the ongoing messaging, right? I know, he hears it from my wife, and he hears it from a couple different sources, but that's every now and then, right? When we talk and we notice it. But if you have that sort of message in front of you all the time, or at least several times, a month, 4 times a week, I'm sorry, 4 times a month, you start to begin you start to be it starts to begin to affect your behavior and what you would do. And then it's also about how you're messaging it, right? If you have something in that content that's important to you, like your grandkid, reference to grandkids, or a reference to, your own, immediate family, you can see how, maybe it would impact you positively to stop stop with certain behaviors. Um, so yeah, I think you're right. I think that, it's a the content's important, what's included in the content, and um, you know, how to get somebody to do something, change their behavior in a way that they wouldn't normally do. The other thing that is helpful with that is, sort of the incentive and reward, the idea of incentives and rewards, right? Some platforms and automation will have built in to their structure, the ability to tie an incentive and reward, either to create their own program, right? It's sort of in freestanding incentive type, offer, or tie it to a risk
True.
assessment, right? Um, Nothing gets people to want to do something like being, paid to do it. So I would
Right.
say, if there is one thing that might actually get people to change their behavior more quickly, it's building in a behavioral based incentive and reward program to help them do it. So what might help my father-in-law would be if his practice, were to say to him, "Hey, if you come in for an A1C measurement, a glucose measurement, uh, this month, and you come in 3 months, and then in another 3 months, we see your glucose, your HbA1c come down, to a specific point, you will get $75 or $100 or some kind of, reward that's meaningful, right? That will probably get him to do something. And on the, on the practice side, this goes back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, which is investing in your practice, right? If you see that score, that HbA1c come down, and that happens over the population of your patients, right? Then, your value-based dollars, the contracts you have with either your health plan or your ACO or whatever it is, you're going to start to see that return. That's going to far outweigh, the $50 or $75 that you might pay to your patient.
It's strange, isn't it? I mean, instinctively, or looking at it logically, you might think that people would intrinsically pay attention to their health and these kind of incentives wouldn't be needed. And yet I can totally understand you, because practically speaking, people do need these smaller incentives to take these smaller steps along the way, right? You know what came to my mind though, as you were speaking, is, and thinking about your father-in-law and some other people who might be in, in a similar kind of group. I wonder, obviously I'm enthusiastic about AI. It kind of comes with the
Of
territory
course.
of working at Talkie. I wonder if a campaign like that would make sense. And I'm a marketer. I think in campaigns sometimes, where you have almost like an imagine an AI confession booth, right? As in, here's a number. The person you're going to be calling is not a person; it's an AI, right?
Mhm.
But on your own time, and with an empathetic listener who has the time to to listen to you and to really follow up, you can just confess. You can disclose or, talk about some of the things that you're doing, as in, get asked questions like how often do you eat processed sugar, or, how many, the amount of exercise you get each day, all of that stuff that leads to an assessment, right? But if I have a feeling that AI could almost have some sort of advantage here, where because it's not so personal, I see it all the time where people are like really honest with their chat GPT, because they have a feeling they're not really talking to a person. So there isn't this
Yeah.
kind of additional emotional burden. You can just lay it on the chat, right? Lay it on the
Yeah.
AI. And I wonder if a campaign like that might make sense, where, this information is not, maybe you don't record the whole conversation, but, the summary of it, or the, assessment that flows out of it would somehow affect, further communications, or you could get some immediate feedback too. Perhaps not a full diagnosis. We're not there yet, definitely. Although I've had interesting conversations about that on previous episodes of the show. Okay, I should really stop here, but that vision just popped in my mind. Does that make any sort of sense to you?
Well, it does, and the reason it does, again, with the very large presumption that AI is capable of kind of doing what we're talking about reliably. The reason it makes sense is back to the beginning of the conversation about practice managers being so busy, right? If you can create a program that's end to end almost like that, right? Where the practice manager kind of hits go, right? All they kind of have to do is say, okay, this makes sense. These are the questions I want. These are this is what I would expect, the result to be based on a, typical patient. And they just have to hit go. Then imagine the time savings, you know, that 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 happens, right? They don't have to administer that program at all, right? So they can keep doing the day to day. They can have that sort of second, you know, um, they can have that component of patient engagement in place. They know they're getting good data. They know that we're going to ultimately drive patients back in, to the practice for a well visit or for whatever it's going to be, to address some of what what happened in that experience with AI. To me, it just seems to be like a win-win.
Yeah, and I think it might be. I think it might be. I'm saying this also based on what I've already seen at Talkie, the way these agents can converse, how much they can already understand, and how flexible they can be. With some smart prompting or, scripting of these agents, I think it could be doable. I think this is kind of the hurdle that we have to overcome right now, is to think, how we can scale certain activities, given that we now have this AI opportunity in front of us. And And I do wonder, and I suppose I would make this possibly one of our last questions because we're running out of time here, but I do want to ask you also kind of more generally about AI. What kind of opportunity do you see here in terms of patient communication? What do you think practice managers should be paying more attention to? We already have, let's say, 300 of them in the audience. More have joined. What kind of message would you leave them with regarding AI?
We're not even at the early adopter stage. I heard a quote or a percentage the other day that not even 20% of people are really actively using ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and you name it. We're still not at that point where where the early adopters have where that percentage has moved up, right? So I think by the time that the early adoption curve is has more people are using it than just those early adopters. I think that AI will have progressed to the point where we may be able to get diagnosis data or at least validation data of diagnosis out of AI. I mean, here's the again, just as an example, literally just yesterday my wife said to me, "You know what? I take these medications, right? And I'm taking 4 or 5 medications, but what I don't know is if any of them have any kind of interaction or dangerous drug interaction." And she said, "You know what? I'm just gonna upload them to chat and see what chat says." And, my first thought was, well, chat hallucinates sometimes, right? So you never know what you're gonna get. But then my next thought was, well, what do you have to lose? Why not? Let's see what it says. And the reality is it may say something that causes you, as in my wife, to call their physician, right? And say, okay, can you help me with this, right? Um, any anytime, in my opinion, anytime, a patient can call their physician with a question like that, right? That's backed by, some research, that's intent based, right? Like they need to get a question answered. That's a chance for that practice to provide value back to the patient, right? And that speaks to loyalty and, all the stuff that, you want to build with your patients in terms of the relationship. So that's why I think it's a good thing. I think AI is is already finding its place. I think when we get past the question about, reliability and hallucinations and all that, then I think the sky is the limit, right? I my mind immediately goes to what was the movie Elysium, I think, with Matt Damon a while back, and where they're in this tube.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh yeah, it's a good movie. You should see it. Um,
Uh-huh.
this boy is put into this sort of tube that scans you and identifies the ailment and fixes it right there. That's where I don't think AI is going to necessarily get us there, but I do think that it will get us to the point where lay people like you and I in terms of our clinical ability can reliably trust a at least an initial diagnosis from AI. How that evolves a practice, if you're a practice, you should be thinking about how to evolve your practice to accommodate that, right? And not work against it.
Yeah. And doesn't it come back, all the way to the beginning of our conversation? None of this is going to happen, and you won't see the benefits of any of this if you don't open yourself up to innovation in the first place. And I know it can be scary, to be honest with you, Jonathan. Right now, we're finding at Talkie that our biggest competition is not the competition, but just, the uncertainty towards AI in general. That's kind of the biggest hurdle to overcome. So the more we can do to try and help practice managers, patients, and the rest of the ecosystem open up to innovation, I think the better. And I think yeah.
What I think will happen with practices is that right now, our biggest confounding factor, as in the terms of the U.S. healthcare system, is access. Right? It is just really hard to get in to see, particularly a specialist, within 6 months. Of when you schedule that visit. Right? This is really hard. Even primary care, you're out sometimes months. before you can get in to see, your doctor. What I think will happen is that we're not necessarily going to, at the practice level, we're not necessarily going to see a reduction in staff because of AI. But what I think is going to happen is we'll see that staff operate way more efficiently, right, with the use of AI. And because of that, you're going to start to see access potentially get better, right? The ability to, it's not going to be 6 months out. I might be 2 months out to see my specialist, for example, my dermatologist or something, because AI will have made the staff's roles so much easier in terms of faster. We're already seeing it with AI scribing, documentation and, practice operations. We're already seeing AI's impact in that, right? And you're going to see a better experience because what the AI is going to do is it's going to say, okay, patient John Cummins came into the practice, and these are all the things that I would, as AI, expect to see, this patient, talk to, right, about. So advanced care planning, chronic condition management, this and that. But I don't see it, right? And this is all going to happen in real time when that patient checks in. And if they don't see it,
Mhm.
then AI will eventually
Yeah.
serve them all of that communication, right? Whether they're on site or not, and it will make the experience in the office that much faster, that much more meaningful. And I think you're going to, I really do truly think AI will change the patient experience and change the experience for staff at the practice who are overworked, sometimes underpaid, Um, and it will make their lives, their quality of life better. And I don't expect that we would see less of them. I think we'll just see them enjoy their job more, right? I think that's kind of my assessment.
That's a wonderful note to end on or to start ending on. What I would add to that is I'm honestly personally excited to be part of this change as well. With the way we're impacting the front desk and introducing agents there. I had a conversation with one of our clients. That conversation, by the way, watchers and listeners, is up on our YouTube, Talkie Health, if you want to check that out. She said that, doctors have assistants, nurses have assistants, but with Talkie AI and other AI agents, even the front desk can have assistants now as well. Something that perhaps wasn't feasible in the, how should I say this, human only economy or human plus tech economy, but is feasible now that we can have a lot more throughput, a lot more capacity, a lot more efficiency with these AI agents in the mix. So now, I'm finding our marketing team, for example, is fairly small when you count the humans, but when you count the additional agents and automations, we punch above our weight. And I think that's going to be happening just across the board through various industries. So that's kind of what I would add on top of that. And with that, I'm afraid our time is coming to a close here, but this was a fascinating conversation. And I do like that it kind of turned into, I had a list of questions. I asked like maybe two of them, and then we just started, going back and forth. That's lovely. So for the last part of this, I would love for you, John, to let our watchers and listeners know where they can find you and follow you, or if you have any other closing thoughts, let's hear them. But primarily, you're an expert in this. A lot of people are gonna want to learn more about you and what you're doing and learn more from you. So where should they go?
Sure. You could reach me. So I like to say, you can call me anything. Don't call me late for dinner. That's so you can reach me a lot of different places. You can reach me at our strategic marketing agency at Incept. My email is jscummins, that's Cummins, at getincept.com. That's INCEPT. Or you can reach me at jscummins at GuideUpHealth.com. All one word.
Awesome. And as you said, email is very much not dead.
No, not at all.
So it's more crowded, but also it's getting filtered better. So it's kind of an AI versus AI type of thing where it's more AI emails, but also better AI filtering. I'm going off track here, but anyway, now watchers and listeners, you can reach John and have a chat with him. And I recommend it because this chat right here was excellent. And thank you, John, for it. As the last bit here, I wanted to repeat again, in case you're listening to us for the first time. Hi, Scaling Practice Management is brought to you by, I should have this pre-recorded, but I don't for right now. It's brought to you by Talkie.ai. We're in the business of equipping practices with AI medical front desk voice agents that can, as we discussed, take some of the burden of the front desk team and help you automate some of the calls. They can schedule appointments, reschedule. You can do prescription refills. They can also do outbound calls. And who knows, maybe one day they'll call you asking you a few questions about your health, and then you'll have an assessment ready and you'll have a plan for your care so that you can get the checkups you need at the time that you need them. So Talkie.ai is where we are, TALKIE.ai. And for more scaling practice management, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and follow us on the podcast platforms. Like I mentioned, we're on YouTube as well. And a good source of information about us would be also LinkedIn. That's probably our most active social platform right now. So look up Talkie on LinkedIn and let's connect there. You can also reach out to me directly. I would love to have a chat with some of our watchers and listeners. And I think that's enough CTAs for now. So John, thank you again. CTAs, calls to action, marketing speak, sneaking in. So John, thank you again so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to talk, and I hope we talk again soon, either on the air or off. Anything as an ending note to share with our audience before I press the stop button?
I don't think so, yeah, but I think that was all I had.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much, dear watchers and listeners, for joining us here today, and I will see you in the next one. That's it for today. Bye-bye.